And welcome back. Today we're going to look at creating a grunge map for a rock, a procedurally generated grunge map, and procedurally generated scratch map. Or for rocks, I guess it would be like an edge map to show worn edges. So this would be applicable for creating wear in almost anything else. Almost everything in the real world has wear. So we're going to look at our reference image, and rocks have, most of the time, they'll have an edge that's been sort of worn off or beaten, or it's got a different color to it. They also often will have grunge, which is to say some kind of dirt or grit or discoloration in recesses around the rock. Now what we can do for grunge mapping is we can actually use an ambient occlusion map for that. So we're going to add an ambient occlusion. We're going to duplicate this mapping node here. I'm going to duplicate this as well. Just connect the two. Set this to 1. So what we've done there is we've just set the scale of this particular vector mapping node to 1, just easily with a single value here. And we're going to take the object vector data from the texture coordinates, and we're going to plug that into the vector. Now we're going to take the vector output and plug it into the ambient occlusion node. And we're going to add a color ramp. There's a lot of color ramps in this particular material. Color ramps are used very frequently. So now we're going to look at what this looks like. And already we can see something really nice happening. If your rock is very low resolution, the ambient occlusion doesn't usually have as much of an effect, or it doesn't have as desirable an effect. So I decimated this rock quite low, and you can sort of see where the edges of the polys are just because of the nature of how it works. This is probably fine for a textured image, especially if you're trying to represent. You generally want to put your low poly models further away from the viewer if you're going for photorealism. So it'll be difficult to see anyway. But even here, this rock is something like 90,000 polys, which is not too bad. So what you can see the ambient occlusion node doing is it's trying to generate data based off of crevices or closed spaces in the model itself. Ambient occlusion is generally a term used to describe the shadowy kind of light or lack of light, the faint lack of light in corners and recesses. So a crack will have, like a small crack will have not as much light that can actually get into it from ambient emission. So refraction in the atmosphere or reflection off of surfaces would all together combined make almost like a ambient atmospheric emission of light instead of emission of light from a single point. So what that does is it creates this soft shadow inside of crevices and cracks. We can probably see it in our reference images here. So when you take images for texturing, you generally try to get them on a cloudy day where there's not a lot of direct light. Essentially, the clouds become like a softbox, and they produce ambient light. You can see some of that here in these cracks. The ambient light it's much darker. The light down here, the ambient shadow is more present, and the light is much more present up here, but there's no like hard shadows. And ambient light almost always respects crevices. But we're not using it for crevices, for emulating ambient light necessarily, or ambient shadow. What we're using it for is to create grunge, because other things tend to collect in crevices as well, including grunge and dirt, algae, things that resist being worn off or washed away by water. So this will give the rock a more weathered look. Something else that it does, and we'll add in, well, first of all, we're going to change the ambient light here so you can actually see what's going on. So we're going to crush the values a little bit with a color ramp for the sake of demonstration. And then we're going to change the distance. And the distance is important for ambient occlusion. It shows the distance that the engine calculates how to calculate the shadow by proximity to other geometry. So if we select only normal or only local, nothing seems to happen. What we can do now is we'll add an object. And we're going to scale the, we're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to press S to scale and drag the mouse out, S again, and then out of edit mode, tab to enter and exit edit mode. And why I did that is to preserve, as a quick way rather, to preserve the object scale values. If you edit the vertices of an object inside of edit mode, you don't change its scale. Whereas if you scale the object outside of edit mode, you do change its scale. Anyway, so what we can see here is that as I move the object or the rock, the ambient occlusion tries to keep that pointiness value. And the pointier the angle of the two surfaces are, the more dark the surface becomes, or the more dark ambient occlusion tends to want to make the thing. So if we click only local, what happens is that it only calculates for the object, not for any other thing in the scene. This is great because we can actually calculate and make the rock look like it has some kind of interface with the ground. In a 3D scene, it's more effective if you try to show something has an interface or an interaction with something else, because in the real world, everything interacts with everything. In the fake world, or in the rendered world, nothing interacts with anything else, unless you tell it to. So, as a demonstration, we're going to add a cube, and we're just going to scale it up. We're going to apply the scale. Sometimes that will definitely throw off Blender and me, or anybody else using Blender. So now we have a cube intersecting with a plane. The shadow's there, and it's convincing, but it doesn't look right, because nothing really in real life intersects or at any kind of perfect angle. So one way we could solve this is by taking the cube and pressing 2, and now we've selected edge mode, Control B to bevel. Now, adding a bevel to a cube is great, because now the cube looks like it's not sharp anymore. And this removes the tendency we have to see this thing and think, oh wow, this isn't real because it doesn't look right. But further than that, if we move it up, so the cube is just intersecting with the surface, maybe a little lower than that. No, out, there we are. So now the cube is interacting with the surface, but there's a very, very faint line between the surface and the cube, and it looks like the cube now is sitting on the surface. It makes a big difference. Anyway, long story short, we're going to delete this cube. The interaction between objects, or the apparent interaction between objects in a 3D scene, helps fool the eye significantly. So this rock now has some mapping that shows it's interacting with things around it, and it shows that there's some kind of buildup or grunge map. We're using the grunge map to sort of indicate that it's interacting with the ground as well, not just to say, oh well, this is a more level of detail. So we have a mask now. So what we need to do with the mask is we're going to mix it with another RGB. And we're going to use it in the factor. We're going to just select the rock itself, like so. I'm also going to change the sheet here because it's throwing off the color values. I'm going to change it to a more neutral color. Otherwise, it's throwing too much light against my rock, and it's throwing off the. I'm also going to change the roughness. I'll change this a little bit more. It's too dark. There we are. So now we have our mix value here, and we have a factor. We're going to plug the color into one of these notches, or on one of these inputs or tags. And now we have something interesting going on. It looks like the rock is, I don't know, painted or something, but there is definitely an effect happening. So if we change this so that the effect is a little softer, more localized to the grunge we're trying to get. You can actually just look at what's happening too by just right-clicking, shift control and right-click. change, oops, shift. You move a bar by clicking and dragging, and then if you hold down shift, you can change it microscopically or very softly. Now I'm going to give this a little more hardness. I want to be subtle with this. I don't want it to be too obvious that I'm doing this. So now we've got this thing going on. Now a good way to create a colored grunge map, you could mix in another map. Like if I just duplicate this, add this in here, and then just pulled in another one like this, close that, and then I'm going to open up another texture, a moss texture. What happens is it would mix in the moss, so which looks good, but not quite the look we're going for. I'm going for at the moment, but it does look good. So what we're going to do instead, we're going to delete this, and we're going to just add a simple, another color ramp. They're so useful. Color ramp. And we're going to take this color ramp, we're going to put it up here. And the factor is irrelevant for this color ramp. It doesn't matter. I'm going to plug the color in here. And we're going to take a look at what's going on. That circumvents shadows. It actually turns the object into an emission source so that you can see all of the texture on the object better. So we can see right here, we have a bit more control over the color of the object. I'm going to select something that's a bit more natural looking. Brown, green brownish, saturated green brownish, something like that. I guess that's a yellow. That might be okay. I'll just obviously bring the value down a lot. Like so. We're going to take this and select that color for some continuity. Bring this over here, I guess. Sort of see these mixing together. They should have an effect on... Actually, no, we're going to run the source in here as well. There. So now we should have, yep, you can see a slight color differentiate, like a differentiated color between. Without that, essentially the input is one color. And we could add, and I think we probably should, add some noise to this. Can add another one here. Select that, and we're going to darken this one. Something like that. See what this looks like without the glow. It's very hard to see. So what we're going to do is add some noise to mask this out. And to do that, yeah. To do that, we're going to, there's a few ways you could do it. The best way is probably to add another mix node here, like so. And we're going to add another noise texture, plug in our vector here. Going to get another color ramp, like so. Plug this in second. See what this is doing. Yeah, because the grunge is in the dark recesses here. So the noise just has to be more detailed. And it should give us maybe it could add mix. It should give us something that will work. Just see what this looks like. That's not correct. Oh, some interesting things going on here. Actually, if we flip the values around, that might work. Yeah, you can see there's the grunge is disappearing from that side. And we're getting a little bit of, yeah. So we just wanted a little noise in the grunge, in the mask, to give us a bit of a break from too much homogeneity. Like that. So the grunge should be a bit more distributed. It looks a little better. It's broken up. So after that, we're going to add some, there's a lot of tweaking you can do, obviously, and not enough time to cover the entire process. This is a tutorial to show you how to do the thing, not you watching me tweak something for 6 hours. So we're going to move on to the next stage, which is the edge scratches. I'm just moving things around so that it'll give me a bit more room. So edge scratches, we're going to use the geometry node, the pointiness from a geometry node. So we need to add in a geometry node. Search geometry. And this is not the same thing as geometry nodes. That's different. This is the geometry node for the shader editor. Yeah, so I'm gonna make the window a little bigger here so I can see what I'm doing. So far, this is just all grunge map. And if you hold down Control, the boxes or the nodes will snap to a location, and it just makes it nicer and neater for your future self. Now, we're going to take a color ramp, and we're going to stick it here. We're going to add the pointiness to the vector of the color ramp, and we're going to see what that does. So right away, we get some interesting results. What the pointiness output does from a geometry node, the geometry node is sampling the geometry that the materials apply to. And I'm going to reverse these. The pointiness node looks to try to find the pointiest values on a mesh in a grade. And this allows you to create a mask that will show just the pointy values. And what that lets you do is you can create something that looks like it has wear. So now we have this really cool map that looks like it's got wear on it. And the way that you would use this is you would take another mix RGB and you would drop it in before the grunge value on the color channel, which is down here. And we would plug this into either we'd plug it in. No, we could just plug it into that. Okay, so we'll plug it into that. And then we're going to look at what this looks like. Now, the effects are subtle. So for the sake of it, I'm going to use a math node and put that right there. And then I'm going to use multiply, which multiplies values. So you should get brighter whites without raising the black values. Right now it's on divide. So we're going to just change this. And right now you can see the white values are really popping up. So this is great, except it's convincing in a way, but it could be better. It's too soft, it's too uniform. So it just looks like it's been replaced. It's replaced the other map with a white value. Yeah. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to, you can make these ramps wider and you'll have more granular control over the tags. What we're going to do, not instead, what we're going to do is add something to this. It's an iterative process, this creation node design. It's right now set to lighten, which should be fine. Lighten should work. Overlay kind of works as well. Overlay looks like it's adding the blacks, so it doesn't work that well. We're just going to use lighten instead. Lighten should only use pixel values. It should only raise pixel values of the underneath or the other map. It shouldn't add any of the dark, or it shouldn't darken any pixels. So that's exactly what we want. We want the bump map or the texture map underneath to be lightened. But it's too smooth. We want extra texture in there. So what we're going to do now is add another map, a noise map actually. Noise maps are amazing. So another noise map. Move these around a bit. And we're going to plug this one into the same set up here. Just going to move this so that it makes sense. Noise map. And of course, another color ramp. Plug the factor into the factor. And we're going to add another mix node to this mask here and this mask is the color ramp mask. I think that should be the other side of this multiply. So I'm just going to add it to the other side. Move these guys back. And we're going to just shift things around a bit. We're going to add this into the other one. And we're going to change it so that it's got a lot more detail. And instead of lighten, we're going to use darken. Or multiply, excuse me. So we're going to change this so it's very, very rigid, very sharp. And we could probably just use constant, to be honest. So now we're going to change the detail. We're going to change it to 8. The roughness, we're going to change that up too. And now we've got a decent amount of, detail in this white noise map, but we're going to change it a little bit from this. I think constant's not going to work. The problem with constant is that we can sample, you'd have to put more flags in to sample the darker colors and add more detail, because the noise map adds detail in grades. So you lose a lot of detail when you have a constant map like this. So we're not going to use constant. Linear should be fine. Yeah, you can see what's going on there. So that's probably okay. I like that. We'll see how that goes. So now I'm going to take I can crank the multiply up a little bit too if it's too too unnoticeable. Yeah, and there's a good amount of detail from the noise texture. Make that a little softer. Yeah. There we go. All right. So now we have some edge scratches or edge details. And we're going to look at what it looks like with just the color map. Yeah, the edge details are very visible. They're not super dramatic, but I find that if you add too much single dramatic things, it washes out the item and it looks far less realistic. So this is already looking much more realistic, and I think that's enough for today. We have quite the snake nest going on here. First of all, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to organize these a little bit. I'm just going to select all of these that have to do with the grunge and edge detail, and I'm going to add them into join a new frame. So you have now, the frame itself is more for organization than anything else. It doesn't really have any actual effect on the nodes, but it helps read the actual procedural snake nest you have going on. So I'm going to name this AO grunge. And sharpness. I'm going to name a few of these to help myself out in the future. Future me is probably going to be looking at this thinking what the heck I was doing. And I think that's about it. Yep. So stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to be looking at moss. See you then, guys.